What's up, guys? It's Steve Bracconi with Team Bracconi, Christie's International Real Estate, back with Alfredo Vastola, our team manager. We have received a whole bunch of inquiries and questions with really general questions within the industry, the real estate industry itself. So we figured we'd take this time today to address some of those questions the best that we can and how we solve those issues or work through those transactions and those different questions. We'll try to answer the best we can.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we take for granted information that we know. So we get a lot of feedback of questions that are what we would consider maybe just common topics. And so we feel like today we'll just try to cover a bunch of those as well.
Sounds good.
So number one is how do we go about building our relationships? I think a lot of times it's viewed as a transactional business, and you work with a client and your goal is to either sell or find them a house. But the way we view it, and I believe the better agents do is you're building a relationship long term, because we never focus ourselves on just that one transaction, because that can also lead to a multitude of lifelong transactions and referrals. So I wanted to just delve into how we focus ourselves and our team on building those relationships, and that also extends out to our partners, vending partners that we build relationship, whether it's inspector or contractors, the whole gamut of what it may take to get put a transaction together, and just after the long run, somebody moves in, hooking them up with the proper contractor. And
so there's certainly an overlap. Much of the dynamics are similar or parallel, in my opinion, whether it be a client or a vendor, but there's also some differences. Before I answer the question directly, I had a situation occur the other day where I'm a listing agent on a property, and I had a client contact me and say, we only work with the listing agent. Mm-hmm. So we want to see this one house and that's it. And that's okay. I don't really have an interest at this point in my career doing that. And I've always strived to build a long-term relationship. Even when I would go into listings, I would let them know that it's not going to change my month or my year too much monetarily. I had enough volume at that point that it would help, but it's nominal. But what would certainly change the trajectory of the year in my career was to build a relationship so that they would tell people either in that building or in that neighborhood, friends and family, hey, Steve did a great job for me. I highly recommend him. He was, super honest and professional. He gave me the right advice. That's going to bring a spider web of transactions back and relationships back. So we always strive on our team to build relationships. And in order to do that specifically with clients, we have to add value in addition to being professional, being on time, having knowledge of the product, etc. I feel as though we have to add a certain layer of value in addition to the standard professional items that we offer. Yeah. For example, instead of just checking in with the client and saying, hey, how's it going? Or did you see anything you want to see? I suppose that might be better than nothing, because if you don't follow up at all, that's clearly not professional, and it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to build relationships or, quite honestly, produce at any level. But instead of just checking in and saying, how are you doing? Have you seen anything? You would offer suggestions, but you would also perhaps send a town report or a school report, like we spoke about many times. Maybe take them out for a tour of the town if they're not familiar with the town. Show them where the schools are. Show them where the police station is. Show them where the town hall is, the parks, etc. If it's on a beach, show them the beach. Whatever it might be, you could add some value. I also tell our agents, try to meet with the client for a quick coffee to really understand what they're looking for. Instead of going through a few houses and it just doesn't work, try to have a very detailed conversation with those clients to establish a relationship. You know that I used to do that a lot when I represented buyers. I would meet buyers at a coffee shop, and I really feel as though I established a strong relationship with the vast majority of those clients during that phase, during that primary fact find. What are you looking for, and what are you looking for from me? Different clients want a different approach sometimes and a different strategy going forward. So to answer your question directly, with clients, I think it's best to try to formulate a long-term relationship and add value. And that's why I tell the agents, sometimes if you sell the first house that you showed them, it's almost impossible to build that long-term relationship. So sometimes it's a blessing if you get weeks or months to work with the client and really get to know them as a person, and they get to know you as a person. And then it comes out if you are an honest person, if you are ethical, if you are really working in their best interest, if your fiduciary duty aligns with their best interest, that's going to come out. And then that is how I feel was one of the strongest ways that I was able to build my business, not being from the state.
That is such a great point. It's great when you set up one showing and they like it, and they, then you make an offer and it's accepted, and that the interaction from that point on is low, and you don't get a chance to. I mean, you can, it's possible, but you don't get that relationship building over multiple interactions, showing what you like, what you don't like, random conversations spur out of those. So that's an excellent point. So, and you mentioned trust as well. That needs to be factored in. That needs to be sewn into that initial interaction. And I think some ways we do that, or you can explain some as well. But one way is when you show them the first house, you're just getting to know them. Point out stuff that may not be, I mean, if the house is worthwhile, you're gonna.
Well, there's also usually good and bad in every house.
Yeah, there's always good and bad.
But the question that I found myself asking constantly is, what can I do, or what can I provide a client that would really give them no choice but to want to retain my services?
Right.
Because they're gonna get a certain level of service across the board, some better than other. But if I go to a listing appointment, or I'm showing a home to a buyer, what information could I provide? What attitude could I hold? What service could I provide? What could I do to make them think when they get back in their vehicle to leave the property, we're using Steve? There's no reason why we wouldn't use Steve. And if we go through an open house, we're going to think of Steve. If we set up another showing, we're going to want to use Steve. And I think if you ask that question and you're strategically able to answer that question, and again, it's really going to, in my opinion, be customized to each client. But if you're able to do that ahead of time, and you understand what the strategy is going forward, so that you really don't give them a choice but to retain your services, it's the right move. I really felt like every time I left a client, whether it be at their home in a listing appointment or showing them property, I felt like I was the absolute best fit for them, because I could adjust and I kind of knew what they were looking for. And I was very confident that I could provide what they were looking for. Of course, there's a few examples where I'm like, this is not a good situation. I don't feel comfortable, whatever. But that's 1%, 2%, whatever it might be. So the other 98 people out of 100, I really felt like I could lock them in, and I had a very good percentage doing that.
And so to those points, and we've had situations where we get to the property and we can't show the home, whether at that moment the seller decided to take an offer, so it's no longer available. They may have canceled the showing. What can you do in those awkward situations to turn the table? So you don't want the appointment to go from, disappointment to disappearing. So how do you turn the tables? A good tactic, you kind of touched on some of those points, but how do you turn the table there to turn it into a positive interaction, even though they didn't see the home that they were expecting? They drove out 30 minutes to see the property.
I was prepared. Every time I went out, the way that I was dressed, the time that I would arrive, my knowledge of the home, whether it was my listing or not, was top notch, because I made sure before they arrived, I was ready. And inclusive of that was a folder that I would always take that had information in there that I knew would separate myself from others that might have shown them properties.
Magic folder.
It wasn't fluff. There was a lot in there, but it was not fluff. And there's a big difference, because if you're just giving them fluff marketing items, sometimes the various lenders will hand us things where, like, it's not going to really add value. What I would provide, and I mentioned it before, was there's an easy way to run reports of demographics, school systems, township information, when it was established, historic information like that, that's people find interesting. Certainly I would have rate sheets in there and stuff like that, but it would align with exactly what they were looking to do. So it wouldn't just be generic information. It would be directly tied to the property, or at minimal, the price point that we were targeting. In addition to that, with your point, if you do arrive on site, and there have been cases where we weren't allowed in, or the door didn't
Doesn't
open with the
open.
key,
Mhm.
wrong
Right.
key,
Mhm.
lockbox didn't open,
Yeah.
whatever, I would at least say, hey, we're here. Let's at least take a look at the exterior.
Mhm.
Let's take a look at the exterior, but also let's look at the surrounding neighborhood, the surrounding values. I would have a report that would often outline the sales of the neighborhood or the couple streets next to it, so they could see what property values were and estimated, and what things have sold for. At that point, I think it's like 85% of people can rule in or out properties based on curb appeal.
Mhm.
And within that curb appeal, I feel like it's neighbors as well. It's pulling up in your overall impression of that property. So what I mean by rule in or rule out is they would consider possibly offering in that property if they see the inside. Or no matter what the inside looks like,
Yeah.
this isn't going to do it for me. I don't like the neighborhood. I don't like the style of the home. The lot's too small. So if we rule it in, then we're going to try to get them back in. But if we rule it out, which most clients don't purchase the first home we see anyway. So if we do arrive on the site, and especially if it's a first meeting, I wouldn't get that frustrated, because I would have a ton of value to add within that folder. I would already know all the information on the property. I would show the exterior of the property at minimal, try to walk the home. I would let them know what the values were in the surrounding area. And by doing all of that, they could rule in or out that property. The final thing I would typically, not the final thing, but one of the other things I would do is I would have other properties
Mhm.
that were similar, even if in a different township, that I would set the appointment. In the event they didn't want to see that appointment, then I would call the listing agent or the owner, and I would politely have to cancel that appointment. But I would have it set up so I didn't have to do it last minute. And again, I was going to add value because, hey, I know that this just happened. It was unforeseen, but I did have 3 other properties to show you. And here's the information. We're all set. If you want to follow me to these, we're here anyway. We could rule in or out. And quite honestly, by showing you a couple properties and just watching your body language and going through these properties, I'm going to have a really, really good idea of what you're looking for, what you like, what you don't like, which is true. I could just watch someone go through and I knew right away they didn't like this aspect, they didn't like that aspect, or they love this. This is why they probably won't move forward. And then we would have a discussion after.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like what doesn't work is maybe what a tactic that was used more often decades ago is that very salesy tactic. You walk in and everything about the house is great, and people can sense you're either too pushy, or you're too salesy, or you're just too hungry for what
That was
I would
never,
call commission breath.
100%. And that was never a hurdle for me, because by nature, I can honestly say I'm not salesy. I mean, you know
Right.
me. And that's one of the compliments I got, is people kind of assume that all agents are salesy type people, pushy people. I felt like that really worked for me, because again, going back and alluding to the conversation we had originally, you're trying to establish a relationship. I'm not even focused on the transaction really whatsoever, unless they really want that home. Then of course I lock in on that property because they want me to make sure we secure that property. Until then, I'm trying to provide as much information for them and figure out what they're telling me in order to find the right situation for them. However, having toured thousands of homes, and sometimes the listing agent or another agent being present, you sometimes have to intervene, because it's
Yeah.
coming off so you're
Yep.
uncomfortable,
Yep.
because it's just like this. It does feel like a timeshare type thing, where
Absolutely.
they're kind of like pushing it down.
Yeah.
And even if the client likes the home, and myself included, I've bought and sold many properties, I'm uncomfortable. So now I'm not even thinking about the product itself.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about how terrible the service is. And it feels like, well, maybe I shouldn't be interested because they're pushing it. So for me, it was so far from the reality of what I would do when I encountered a client, that when
Right.
it happened, you kind of shut that down.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, that does still, you still come across that, and you feel it, and you're walking through, especially if it's a larger home, and you got to go through this every room, and it's the pushiness and the salesiness.
You
of
can
it.
be informative
Right,
without being
right, which is
salesy,
hugely,
but there's
huge
a
difference.
line there, and when the
Yeah.
line is crossed, and there's certain lines that we hear all the time. I don't care to repeat them, but it's just like that wasn't necessary. Just the fact of the size of the room, or the history of the house, or the year the house was built, or something like that. That's great.
Yeah, I think visually, most people, unless it's something unique and not familiar with it, visually they're looking at the house. They don't need to, you to tell them that that thing that they're looking at is there. It's more informational, when that was installed, or, the more information you have about
Something you wouldn't know by looking at it.
100%. And
That's what
that's
you
the
wanna
huge difference.
add value.
And I think approaching it that way adds value. It builds, trust, and it builds a relationship a little bit easier.
We need to move on to the next topic, but I did want to answer the second part of the question, which was the vendor
Yes.
part. So it's very similar in the sense that I do want to build relationships with vendors over the course of years. But the biggest difference and disparity is they have to 100% act in the best interest of our clients at all times, no matter what.
Right.
And we have seen instances where nothing really unethical, but we question things, and then we would need to get a different source. So we want preferential treatment for our team and our clients as far as availability, as far as VIP, where they can speak with the owner, for example, if we have a significant issue or a question. But the line or the biggest disparity, I think, is that they have to have the best interest of the client. Whereas if we're working directly with the client, clearly it's the client, right? So the vendor, to me, has to be an intermediary to the client, but still representing the best interest of the client always, no matter what.
It does us no good if the inspector, for example, can get the deal done, quote unquote, because he's not going to point out things that are important.
No, and then again,
that's fine for one transaction.
Right. No, well, that's exactly right.
It's not fine at all, but it gets you through one transaction.
But that's transactional thinking.
That's transactional thinking, exactly. So,
and we're thinking long-term relationship. And I started a little slower than probably other agents, I would think, because I was told I was overly honest, which to me is just honest.
That's a compliment.
But I really didn't think that certain homes were either worth what people thought they were worth as far as sellers. I saw some issues in a couple of the homes that I felt were more significant than we were led to believe. But those clients, even though I lost that transaction, I know for a fact that they sent me, and they may have sent me other people I wasn't aware of, but family members and friends, and they ended up buying something anyway, most of them. But they sent more people, and that's the whole thing, is if you really want to build a business, it's a great industry, because if you do the right thing, which is much easier said than done, because we see a lot of the other, but if you do what should be done is the right thing to do over the course of time, it pays dividends anyway.
Yeah.
So it's the best thing for everyone.
Yep. I like how it's very similar, as the focus needs to be on the long-term relationship building. If the vendor does wrong by us as the agent, it's going to tarnish possibly our relationship with the client. So it all has symbiotic, has to blend together. So let's jump into the next topic here. We talked a little bit off camera here about the traditional avenue, and especially relevant now since the available inventory is so low. So a lot of people are looking to new construction. The typical avenue you would go is land acquisition, as you mentioned.
There's 3 loans involved, as we were talking about.
Yeah.
And I've done the process for clients and for myself. So typically there's a land acquisition loan, so you can acquire the land a lot. And then there would be a construction loan in place. And those can be structured in different ways. The most common in my experience is there's what's called draws, where you have X amount of money. So the total loan might be $1 million. And then depending on how much work is done at each bullet point or each phase chronologically, you would be released the next amount of money to do additional work. Prior to the release of the money, or the draw, which it's called, there would be an inspector from the bank that would come out. There's also an inspector from the town that would come out to check off everything. And typically I would see a bank inspector come out, make sure that what you're saying on paper is correct. And if it was done and done properly, they would then release the next draw so you could do the next phase. So you would get something for the foundation. Once the foundation was done and checked off on and inspected, then you would get the framing money and so on and so forth. Then you could lump some of those together. And some draws that I saw, schedules, would be 12 different allotments, and others were 5. So depending on the bank, they structure it different ways. Once you're done with the construction and you get the certificate of occupancy and you're ready to move in, you would get a third loan. So there was a land acquisition, then there's the construction loan, and then you would get more of a conventional financing, 30-year term or whatever.
Current value of the property.
Yeah. So you would get traditional financing for a mortgage at the end. So you've got 3 different loans. which still works, and it's good as long as you have the money up front and the down payments necessary
And patience.
and the patience. So we came across a developer that we've been doing business with now that he actually purchases the property and allows the client to use a down payment to purchase the property. He finances it through his bank. So he's financing the lot through his bank, utilizing the client's 20% down. And the client gets to put a lien on the property, knowing that it's secured. Once that's done, the developer builder then gets the construction loan under his name. So the client has no responsibility to these drawers or whatnot. And it's already predetermined exactly what the cost of the project will be, including the land, including the interest that they're going to pay or that the builder will pay in this example, and including all the supplies and labor to build the property. And at the end of the project, they've already got the 20% in for the land. They would then assume a normal mortgage, which would be inclusive of that 20% equity in the land and whatever else they wanted to come up with, depending on their total down payment and get conventional financing. So there's really, in that scenario, only one loan that the client would have to get, and it's the day of closing.
The final loan.
So it's not a whole heck of a lot different than a traditional purchase that's already built,
right?
Other than the 20% definitely goes hard because in this case, the developer is building a custom home that's specifically designed for the client. They've signed off on everything, architectural plans, landscape design. If there's a pool, everything is signed off, and it's all custom room sizes, layout, the way that the home sits on the lot. So it's a completely custom home. And for that reason, the builder doesn't want, it's not a spec home. It's not going to be generic enough that he would feel comfortable perhaps flipping. So it's going to be very specific, and even everything down to the finishes, the appliances, the flooring. There's all budgets set in, and he'll give examples of what would be inclusive in that budget. And then you could upgrade or downgrade, and then the price would be reflective accordingly.
So for those that may not be familiar with the terminology, you said the money is hard. Yeah, explain what that means.
So in the event that the buyer decided not to proceed in that particular case where the money is considered hard, they would lose their deposit. They would be willing to walk away from, in that example, the 20% of the land acquisition cost. So if the land is $500,000, it would be $100,000, or 20% they would walk away from and say, you know what, I don't want the home anymore. Now, not to get too complicated, but this specific builder, he's a great guy. And he said, if I can sell the property for a profit, I'll give the money back. And that's obviously specific to each contract, but he's not looking to keep money, which the right builder, I feel, should not be. He's just not looking to sell a unique property designed for a specific person who now no longer wants to buy the home. He needs some skin in the game in order to move forward. But he's taking tremendous financial risk in order to make the process as easy as possible for the buyer, the consumer, the end user, the client.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk up front for him.
Oh, yeah.
But, coming up with creative strategies in a market where inventory is scarce, I think is super helpful. I think a lot of people who may be interested and have the money, especially since there's a lot of equity in homes that people already own, they just don't have anywhere else to go. It's going to be helpful and important because some of those, that process could be scary, the land acquisition, the construction loan, the final product. But can you maybe it's a little too early in this in the process, but can you explain, the client finds a land, or maybe even the developer has land set or has something in mind as well. How do they go from deciding to make a purchase and all those plans are built in? What's the time?
Yeah, the way we've done it, this particular builder has a lot of contacts within certain townships he's had a lot of business in. So he contacts potential clients, I guess prospects, and he has myself and other people in the real estate industry that have contacts that will say, hey, check out this property. I think they might be looking to sell. So he gets a lot of things off market. And what he'll do is he'll purchase the property or go under contingency to purchase the property that he has, let's say 60 or 90 days to perform, and he can back out. So he'll give a cash offer, and it's a pretty fair offer. It's not a low ball offer. So the seller, it's easy. There's no inspections. He's typically knocking down a structure if it's there, and he's going to build. And he wants the contingency really for two reasons. One, he wants to make sure he does some due diligence with the township to make sure the setbacks, which is
Okay.
within the lot needed to build. He wants to make sure that there's enough buildable land that would warrant the price he's paying, right? So you want that approval. But the second thing is he's trying to line up a buyer,
Right.
someone that specifically wants that property. So now you have an idea of what you could build as far as square footage, and he has the person lined up. So if he can do that within that 2 months, 3 months of due diligence period, if you will, he'll close the loan. And if he doesn't, he'll either ask for an extension if he feels like it's a viable project that we could get someone, the right buyer, or he'll just be able to walk away.
And our clients who may be interested in this can also, search for property that may fit, and we can present that to him as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, and absolutely. And any builder could theoretically do this, but like you said, there's an inherent risk that most builders aren't comfortable with. That he does this, and this is one of the ways that him and I sat down and we mapped this out and went through, and it gives the consumer a clear advantage in a difficult market to build what they're looking to build with minimal financial outlay and maximum gain, because they get exactly the property that they want.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there's benefit to the builder, but he's really going out, I don't want to say on a limb, but he's taking extra pressure away, putting it on himself so that he can provide a service and a property to buyers in this dynamic market we're in. That's awesome. So I'm sure there might be a list of towns that he's more comfortable in. We can get it out to people, whoever's interested.
If anyone has any interest in learning more about the traditional ways of building a new construction property, which I've certainly done plenty of, or this secondary way that we're actually strategically doing it for some of our clients now, they can feel free to reach us directly anytime.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way to go. If
it depends on the town, like you said. If it's a town that we're in and it makes sense, we'll line up a project for them and we'll get them what they want.
That's an amazing program, and I hope people do reach out for more information. Next topic we wanted to go over is, kind of segueing from this conversation, is just how, and there's this conversation can go on for hours. There's tons of podcasts dedicated, but how real estate, we often look at it when we're working with clients to either sell their primary home or to get into a primary residence, but how it functions as a long-term investment for wealth building. And it could be done in multiple ways. It could be your primary investment that you hold on to for a long run. Or it could be just you getting into a more of a strictly investment.
There's a ton of advantages with tax code too.
Right.
I'm not even going to get into that.
Not going to get into
that.
So
that's a totally different separate conversation, but there's ways to depreciate assets on property. There's ways to exchange property, tax deferred. There's all types of things you can do that's advantageous within the real estate industry to save taxes and depreciate assets. And so we won't even get into that today. That aside, which is a huge factor, I think it's very important. And what I heard as a young investor when I was in my early 20s is get in the game, which I think is very important.
Yeah.
And if you get in the game when you're young and you are able to even pick up an investment property, even if you're losing a little bit each month, losing in the sense that you're paying out of pocket, you're still building equity. You're still having someone pay the majority of that debt off. And by the time you're not too old, maybe my age, you're going to have these assets either completely or mostly paid off. Number one, the probability is over the course of that time, that home will build equity or just be worth more. It's an asset that is appreciated in value, right? The second thing is, as you pay down that debt, refinance when mortgage rates are, down, they go up and down constantly through cycles, or pay off the debt completely, your income monthly, your return on investment annually goes up exponentially. Yeah. So now you have what would be considered a passive income on each piece of property, but you also have equity or something that is appreciating in value. And I think normally it's 4 to 6%, but we've seen years that were down, and we've also seen years that went up more than 20%. So it just depends on the year. But if you can get 4 or 6% on something that not only is appreciating over that time each year, and it's cumulative, so it's adding. So if you appreciate 4%, it's on the new number each year. So it's substantial. But in addition to that, like I said, you're going to have less and less debt. So your holding costs are less, other than, of course, property tax goes up, but your holding costs should be less over time. And your income monthly on a rental property should increase over time. So you're getting more passive income and a asset that continues to increase in value going on probability over the course of time. And if you start to multiply that out, instead of one unit, maybe you do one a year or one every 18 months, and you start when you're 22, 23. All of a sudden, by the time you're 30, and you probably start buying more because you become more comfortable, you have more money, you're probably making more money,
and you get used, you know what you're looking for,
right? And you can take money out if that's a totally different situation than what I did, but it's not necessarily wrong. And a lot of people have done extremely well doing that, where they take money out of the asset that it appreciated. So if you bought something for 500, now it's worth 750. You pull a couple $100,000 out of that and you use that money to buy the next asset, which probability over time will increase, and your holding costs will come down on that as well as you pay off that debt. And then you start to multiply it. Now you've got 2, then you've got 4, then you've got 8. So it's something also that no matter how we cut it, there's a limited supply. You can continue to build up, but there's only so much land, right? So there's a limited supply. And we could also argue that the buyer demand over time has gone up. So your supply is diminishing, theoretically and mathematically, and your buyer supply is increasing. So that's economics 101, right? So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Again, not getting into the tax code or the tax breaks. And that's another whole situation where people are brilliant with depreciating assets, selling that one, exchanging it. And that's really for a CPA to talk about, but
even passing it on to beneficiary. I mean, there's so many different. I'm not an accountant. You're not an accountant, so we're not going to get into some of those because we although we may know some of it, we don't want to speak on the topic that we're not licensed in or have the authority to do so. But I think what you mentioned right off the bat was, when you're young and let's say you look at the numbers and they look good, but all of a sudden that you are unable to rent it at the rate that you want for whatever reason. Let's say it costs you $100 a month. That is still long run going to be a benefit to you than just putting it away in a savings account.
Huge.
Right? Because of all the things you mentioned. There's going to be depreciation. If it's just a strictly investment property, you can depreciate it.
I would advise everyone to get in the game, and I would advise people, if you can get a great deal, of course get it. But if you're young enough and you can get a fair deal or even a good deal, grab it. And then continue on. And then as you become more established and you have your base and you have your passive income and you have equity building, then become more selective. You also have less time as you get older, right, to have those assets appreciate. So some of the most successful people I've seen doing it weren't all that selective initially. They knew they could cover, maybe be out a few bucks, maybe make a few bucks, but they knew the long-term play and it was a good spot. They were comfortable. But as they built their portfolios, they became more and more selective, and rightfully so. Right. And now some of them that I've worked with since they were in their 20s and now they're in 40s, they are extremely selective, and they should be, but they already have what they need. And now it's just bonus. Right.
Yeah. It's like you say, get in the game, because long run, I've gone over this in previous podcasts. The last 4 decades, properties have appreciated at least 30% in that 10-year span. So you're holding it for 10, 20, 30 years. The appreciation is going to be insane. Historically, I mean, we cannot predict the future, but historically, real estate has been the most solid investment. So get in the game. That's why get in the game early and just keep doing it if you can afford to do it. What about the cycles in real estate, which some people may not be familiar with, and we get into busy seasons and slower seasons, and when's the best time to sell, when's the best time to buy?
We've seen several cycles in my career, and unless you've gone through those, you don't really realize how much that pendulum shifts, whether it's to the seller side or buyer side. I've seen both. I went through the recession, and a typical historic cycle is 5 to 7 years. So 5 to 7 years, the market would depreciate. It maybe stabilizes for a year and a half. Each market's different, obviously. I'm just speaking generally in the United States. And then it would appreciate for about the same time, 5 to 7 years, and so on and so forth. What I'm starting to see now is longer cycles. We started to see a pullback for, I think it was 2 quarters, right as COVID hit, after like an 8-year slow uptick or something like that. And after 2 quarters of that pullback, because of when COVID hit,
just COVID,
and it just spiked the market back. So there was no real depreciating cycle. It was just 6 months ish.
Yeah, that was a pause, just uncertainty.
But I think it would have come down if there wasn't that catalyst. Doesn't matter. There was a catalyst and it went up. So now we continue to just go, and it's been a long cycle up. So at minimal, you would think that there's going to be another pause, probably a longer pause, where things kind of stabilize and sit tight. And other analysts have felt there has to be a correction, that the appreciation is unsustainable, and that sort of thing. We've talked about this many times. I don't want to talk about it too much today, but basically the bottom line is there's little to no inventory, and there's a lot of buyers. So even though the interest rates have doubled and really more than doubled at this point, there's still multiple buyers for any property that's reasonably priced in the average priced homes, right? When you start to get into the real luxury market, things have slowed a little bit, I believe, in our experience, at least the ones on our team. But the stuff in the middle or starter homes are still extremely hot. There's still multiple buyers. I just listed a property in the town I live in New Jersey Sunday, and I think we've had like 24 showings in just over 24 hours or something like that. So it just been, and that's actually a higher price point. Not super high, but it's over $1 million. And so the strength is still there. And I think until these buyers really find the properties that they want, and it's a longer term hold, and the buyer volume were to drop a little bit, we're still going to see this. So
yeah, I'm going to try to get something up on, because we were just talking about this on our newsletter, how because Zillow purchased Showing Time not too long ago, and then they have better Showing Time provides access to properties. A lot of people will do that electronically to request appointments, and their data shows that buyer traffic is stronger than it has been since 2017. So just to your point, the amount of traffic we're seeing, and people will say, well, the sales are not that. That doesn't make sense because the sales are not. Yeah, because there's no inventory. So traffic is still super high, which tells us the buyer demand is there, but there's a lack of inventory.
Yeah, in that example, if there's 24 showings, we're only going to see one transaction from that.
Right.
There's only one home to sell. So whether you have 50 showings in the first few days or 3, if it sells, it's still one transaction. So you're right, transactions are down because there's just no inventory.
Yeah. Exactly.
So until that changes, we'll start to see typically when that does change, we'll start to see the days on market rise. We'll start to see some reductions take place. And then, inventory will start to build up. But right now, we just haven't started seeing that yet.
Have you noticed how our common cycles of, it's this busy season, it's a slow season, how that's kind of changed quite a bit?
It's kind of meshed into one.
It's meshed.
We did have I believe for our team, we had a couple weeks in August that were slower. We'll probably have 1 week between like Christmas and New Year's that is people prioritize family and holidays like they should, and that will be slower. But other than that, it's the busy seasons are extended out, and busy is not necessarily, like you said, transactions. Busy is we're getting a lot of calls, we're getting a lot of showings. But again, you can show a property 40 times and it's going to sell once. Yeah. And if you're lucky enough to be the agent that sells it, then that's great. But it doesn't create 5 transactions from that. Now you might find that client something else that didn't get the property, but there's a lot of work being done right now for less transactions. And I think, like we were talking about earlier, I mean, we're way outperforming the market as a team, but I think there's almost like half the transactions that there were last year
Yes.
on MLS.
Yes.
So if there's half the transactions, and I don't know if there's more or less agents, I know some have dropped out because it's got a little tougher, but I know some have continued to join. So it's probably a wash is my guess,
Yeah.
but there's just less transactions.
Yeah. So I've noticed that as well. I feel like my typical, and I've been an agent for 11 years. I kind of can gauge when I'm going to be a little busier than others. And I can't predict it right now. It's sometimes.
No, we take it when it comes.
Yeah. Well, we try to stay as busy as possible, but it's been definitely a dynamic market for sure. Yeah. So I think we're going to try to pull up what I was mentioning, which is pretty interesting. You have by quite a bit actually. It's increased since they've been tracking this information, which is not too recently. But I was surprised when I saw this. I thought it would still be high because we know that we're seeing a lot of traffic, but I did not expect their data to show that it's increased quite a bit since it's over the past several years, which has been busy. So did you want to cover anything else? I think we're good on our topics.
I think that's good. I mean, those were most of the questions that people had when they inquired. There's other questions they have. I think a lot of that was covered inside those other questions.
Yeah.
But I think that the wrap up for the day would be, I would advise every agent, and rightfully so, to strive to build relationships, healthy relationships, trusting relationships. And it's better for everyone. It's going to be better for the agent. It's better for the real estate team and agency. It's much better for the client. And if you do that, it comes back. So we've had to work on certain things within our team and dynamic and that sort of thing, and shift certain markets. We always are adapting and pivoting, but we've always remained nice. We're nice and we're professional, and we're able to build relationships. And I think that's been a common denominator why we've always been successful and we continue to rise.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult transition for agents to make that have joined, past couple of years. A lot of them since COVID, they jumped onto the real estate industry because it was a different market. There was, I kind of hate the term, but I hear the order taking. But it's true for a sense. You were so busy with buyers interested in, and there was inventory, and it was a lot. Wasn't as much knowledge brokerage needed. It was more locating the property, checking it out, making an offer. Now it's really understanding the markets that they're looking for, understanding the property way better, getting them through the complexities of financing because it's changing as the rates go up, and there's a lot more involved than just, hey, I saw the property, I like it, let's write an offer. And that's and the follow-ups, right? That's been, I think, the hardest.
The market's changing a lot, and the market will continue to change, in my professional opinion, over the next months and years. If anyone has any questions, whether they're an agent on or off our team or a client that's working with us or not, we encourage you to reach out. We will give you our honest assessment. Clearly, our real estate knowledge is in the tri-state area. We are in Massachusetts as well. I have some knowledge of the Florida market, but we don't know every market in the United States. But the markets that we do know, generally speaking, historically speaking, lead the charge throughout the United States. So what's happening in our markets typically filters down, trickles down to the other markets later, which is good because we're the market leader, right? So if something happens here, we'll usually see it a month to a few months back after it happens here. So if things start to slow down or pull back, we usually will see that trickle down throughout the country.
For sure.
The last 2 cycles have been that way. So I suspect that will be the same thing. So anyway, if any agents on or off our team or any clients working with our agents or not have any questions, they can always contact us at S. Bricconi or Team Bricconi at Vest Real Estate. We appreciate everyone. We appreciate the questions that we received. We hope that we answered them. And again, if there's any follow-up questions, we're happy to address those. We appreciate all the support.
Thanks, everyone. Follow us on YouTube at Team Bricconi. And
please subscribe.
Get those questions in, and we're happy to respond.
Awesome. Thank you.